So we're in Liverpool, right? You know, home of the Beatles, Jerry and the Pacemakers, Ferry Cross the Mersey, the Liverbirds. And we're talking about a Polynesian death cult. I mean, I have no idea how this fits together. But there was
we all know about the great Polynesian migration into Liverpool.
Of course.
This is a ManeHustle Media podcast.
Virtual Rhiality Studios. A new realm of creativity.
Konnichiwa, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Matcha, Masala, and Murder. Blended besties, spill the tea. We are just a couple of mixed mates musing over matcha, masala, and murder. And today we are celebrating the holidays in our festive onesies.
Festive PJs!
Festive PJs. This technically has nothing to do with Christmas. It's just the one I wear on Christmas. So I'm Grumpy Care Bear today. I am one of your co-hosts, Sharmane Fury, aka Matcha, and I am joined by my co-host, the wonderfully festive
Rhia Kaur, aka Masala.
So this time we're just gonna do something a little bit different than what we've done before. We are going to be both telling a tale, a shorter tale. Which I know after last week, I apologize. I talked for a very long time. But to be fair, it was 3 stories in one story. It was the legend, the historical context, and the real story. So
sometimes you just got to get all the detail, go on a deep dive and tell the whole story. That's what the people are here for.
That's what you're here for. So yes, sorry that it's so long. But today we're going to tell 2 shorter stories that are either Christmassy themed and or took place around or on Christmas.
Basically, we're going to crowbar them in because this is our festive episode and we wanted to let the festivities commence.
Excellent. Well done.
Festivities.
Anytime we can into it. Anytime.
So we were like, okay, we'll just find our best stories and we'll do our research on anything related to the festive season, the holidays. And this is what we've come up with. So it's a bumper edition because it's double, but it shouldn't be bumper in length because each one is a little bit mini. There's a little festive surprise for you guys at the end.
Excellent.
Okay. And we just wanted to have a holiday slumber party together, but considering we live on different sides of the world, this was the closest we could get.
And I love an adult PJ party. Like this is, and not like sexy PJ party because that's not my vibe, but like me rolling up in my Grumpy Bear thing, 100%. So I appreciated the idea. I like that we can. Oh, I have pockets. I forgot.
Hey,
that made me
excited.
excited.
I got a festive blankie. If that,
excellent.
Blanket. I'm a grown up. I have a festive.
It's
blanket.
Fine. Blankie is perfectly suitable. I almost feel bad that I'm drinking tea today and not hot chocolate or something. Like something that feels.
Yeah. Should I have some kind of, it feels very American to say some hot cocoa with a peppermint candy cane. But I'm going with a festive London mug, snowy London scene, which is
excellent.
On brand. And it's tea because tea is our brand.
That's what we do. That's what we do. This is my everyday cup, or as you were saying earlier, Brilder's brew. This would be my generic cup. It is another keep calm and carry on, or keep calm and drink tea. I apologize. Keep calm and drink tea, but this
keep calm and carry on drinking tea.
Carry on drinking tea, right? It both matches my Grumpy Care Bear, but it's also my go-to cup when I don't have a particular feeling. So a lot of my mug grabs are based off of how I'm feeling that day.
Yeah.
If I don't have a particular feeling, this is my general mug. So
that is a good shape. It's got a good, well-sized handle. It looks well balanced to me. I'm sure it drinks well.
It drinks well. Good mouthfeel.
Yeah.
Decoration is on both sides. That is one of my pet peeves.
Yes.
When the mug doesn't, like if it's a message mug and you don't have it on both sides, what if you're left-handed?
Hello, that's what I was just about to say. As a left-handed person, I am angry about the one-sided mug.
Yeah. So I'm semi-ambidextrous. Yeah, it's very right-handed centric.
World. Did I get that right? Whichever way around.
Right centric. Okay. So I am semi-ambidextrous. I would have been fully ambidextrous if they kept me in my classes, but I have a right-hand parent and a left-hand parent, and I was doing stuff as a little kid with both hands, and so they couldn't figure out what I was gonna be.
Yeah.
So in kindergarten, they had me in this class. It just so happened my school had it. It was so bizarre. And so me and two other kids every day got separated from the rest of the kids, and we had to practice writing with both hands on chalkboards. Yeah. And we had to like eat meals with whatever, So if you see me, I am right hand dominant for writing. Yeah. But I carry things like a left-handed person. I also shoot pool, snowboard, and shoot guns if I shoot guns left-handed.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, so I've practiced shooting guns just so I knew how to do it. I don't own guns. I'm not a gun person. I got certified so that, if the zombie apocalypse happened and a gun fell in front of me, I'd be like, I know how to do this, So
I wouldn't know that. So
America. Yeah. It was kind of an easy thing. But I'm actually more accurate left-handed.
So they do say that left-handed people are generally more ambidextrous because they have to learn to be, because the world is not really set up for left-handed people. So I do a lot of things, like I sew with my right hand because I think I learned from my mum and she's right-handed. So, we that's probably why. But then I know we both knit, and obviously knitting, that's, you've got to use both your hands quite a lot, in a lot of these crafts anyway. So that's obviously a good skill if you are good with both sides.
Yeah.
But my immediate family, so we were a family of 6, right? My parents and 4 siblings, and 4 out of 6 of us are left-handed, which is crazy high number.
Yeah, that's a pretty strong number.
Yeah, it's most unusual.
Yeah, I don't know. So I'm technically one of 4 that I know about, which is why I took ancestry, just in case. I'm technically one of 4. I'm the oldest, but I have a full sibling, and then we have 2 half siblings from my dad's side. And we lived with the eldest of the 2 younger ones for a little while till she was 4. And then we moved away, court case and all that kind of stuff. I never lived with the youngest one. I don't know that one. I saw him one time in person when he was a baby. So I'm technically one of 4, but I don't have like oldest of 4 siblings vibe because I didn't grow up around them. But I don't know what they are. And I wondered that because I know that my full brother is right-handed, but I was the only one that did things between us left-handed. But I feel like I have vague memories of my sister doing like what I did, grabbing things, like hitting both. So I imagine it wasn't nurtured, but even when I would write right-handed, I would hook my arm over it first. And I had to take it out because like I would watch my dad write, and so that's why I thought. So I would get it's probably why I have tendonitis because it was awkward. So I do write like this now, but at the time I would hook my right arm over.
When I was at school, I used to turn my page that I was writing on from like 90 degrees to turn it completely 180 degrees so that I didn't smudge, because, at school, when you graduate to using the fountain pen with the ink, it's super smudgy, and I would always get told off. But we used to get told off for slanting the page, and like literally, I mean, this was back in the day. So you would get whacked with a ruler, to turn the page straight, and you weren't allowed to do that. But then you'd also get in trouble for smudging your work, which is near impossible as a left-hander using an ink pen of that kind. So that did, that was bothersome that they were still so anti-left. Like, it was still such a negative thing when I was at
so
school,
incredible that like the way you're born is something we have to break. So, and that's left-handedness, queerness, whatever.
Exactly. And I think it's one of those ridiculous things. So from Latin, the word for left is sinister, and that's where we get our word sinister. So people associate that with evil doing. Everything on the left is evil and bad, and possibly related to devilish things.
Yes.
So I guess we've just been tarred with that brush now. So
which would track if I believed in shit like that, it would track for me, because I think of myself as more gray than black or white, right? I mean, not just because I'm mixed, but also because like I tend to fall under like, you could do some dirt for a good cause, like I think that's okay sometimes. And I don't think all murder is bad murder, like there's some, obviously self-defense would be one that's reasonable.
We've talked about this, and it will be in episodes that you guys will have already heard. We've been into some of this stuff, but they haven't aired yet. So no spoilers from us.
Yes.
But is it always bad to murder?
I don't think it's always bad. Even if it's like it didn't happen to you, but it happened to someone else and you're trying to be in defense of that other person. Like, even to me, like that's a hard one for me not to necessarily, say that's not okay. So maybe me being semi-ambidextrous.
It's just all part of living in that in-betweeny zone, isn't it? So, I mean, I don't know what level of crime someone would have to commit against Christmas for me to murder, but I take Christmas food pretty seriously, so I'd probably be pretty angry if people messed up.
Yeah, don't mess up dinner.
But would I go all the way to murder? So, should that lead me nicely into telling you my story for today? Shall I be mother? She's ready and waiting.
I'm ready to hear it.
For those in the audience who aren't British English, the whole shall I be mother thing, if you don't know what that is, head over to TikTok. There's going to be a video explaining my kind of tea lingo and my tea chat. So anytime I make Britishisms about the tea stuff, that's where you'll find it. Head over to the TikTok. That's where all your info is. If you need a translator.
What's funny about that is we've been doing the pop-ups. That's the pop sound for those of you who are only listening to the audio only. We've been doing the pop-ups to translate things, but I'm wondering if I'm missing some of them because I'm a mixed Brit American. And so some of them are so like some of them I know these are Britishisms, but some of them are probably so much a part of what I say anyway that I assume the American audience would need the translation. And I'm trying to translate the American stuff for the British audience too, not always knowing what you wouldn't perceive as.
Although I feel we get a lot more context cues because we watch a lot more, consume a lot more American media. So we're possibly more well versed. Some of the stuff we say over here is really ancient and needs a lot of explaining, especially when I do all my Cockney. He done legged it, So, on your bike, governor.
I fucking love on your bike. Like, honestly. The one I think that doesn't need translation for American audiences that they've started to try to adapt if they watch anything even remotely British is Isn't It?
Ah, okay.
Americans do love that one.
Okay. So we've got In It, which is so that's really evolved over the years. It's been in lots of different cultural groups have sort of had this word, and it's developed, and it's really interesting now because my son's a teenager, so I get these words that come home and now they've taken on a different meaning. So I'm really on a journey, with the slang. Anyway, I digress, which we're not doing today because we're being
staying on time.
So allow me to tell you the tale of the unsolved murder. So there will be no satisfaction, sorry. Just lead with that. Of Maureen Dutton. To give you a brief intro, sources say that police gathered the statements of between 20,000 and 50,000 people during the investigation into this crime.
What?
Yet it remains unsolved to this day. The front pages of newspapers were strewn with headlines about this murder, including, interestingly enough, the first ever use of an identikit image of a suspect in on a British front page. It's the first time they printed a sort of is that, what word would you use? I don't know the translation for that. So when a computer or a police artist has drawn and put together an e-fit.
I mean, literally, Americans would just call it a police sketch.
Okay. So identikit is, I think, the thing that. Anyway, right. So
yeah, I hadn't heard the word. I felt like I roughly knew what you were saying, but yeah, I think Americans would just call that a police sketch.
Okay, so this was the first time this had ever been printed, kind of on the front of a newspaper about a suspect. So that's kind of interesting.
Oh wow!
And this suspect was wanted for murder, or was this, in fact, a ritualistic killing that had nothing to do with the man in the picture?
Oh, murder most foul.
Indeed. So, 21st of December, 1961, in Knotty Ash, which is a suburban area on the outskirts of the city of Liverpool. And Liverpool is in the northwest of England, for anybody who doesn't know that. That year, there was a treacherous fog in the whole lead up to Christmas, and it descended over the whole northwest of the country. And our victim is 27-year-old mother of two, Maureen. She waved her husband off to work and readied her two children for the day ahead. Her mother-in-law was coming over to babysit the newborn baby, who was only 22 days old, Andrew, so a really new baby.
Dang.
And Maureen was going to take the older child, David, who was about 2 years old, to a local church to look at their Christmas scene. They had a nativity, a crib scene, and she was going to take him to do something festive while the mother-in-law babysat at home. The freezing mist descended and visibility entirely disappeared. So the boy's grandmother phoned up and said, "I can't come. We have to cancel our plans." Maureen didn't leave the house that day. She stayed at home, spent the morning playing with her children, and she began to prepare lunch. And that was the last lunch she would ever prepare. Our cozy festive scene would soon turn horrific. There are so many holes in this story that we still haven't been able to figure out. But what we do know is that just after 6 p.m., Brian Dutton, her husband, father of the two children, returned home from work as a research chemist and found a bloody scene.
Wow.
So the house lay in total darkness. The family's lunch remained half-eaten on the kitchen table, and his wife's body lay in a pool of blood on the living room floor. Crouched at her side was the 2-year-old son, and the newborn baby lay in his basket in the corner of the room. So an investigation was opened. The police hunted high and low for clues, but none came. So Maureen Dutton had been stabbed 14 times in her chest, her throat, and her back in what we think full view of her children.
The little ones, yeah.
The murder weapon was thought to be a long-bladed knife, and it was never found. Door-to-door inquiries heralded no news, and no one had been seen coming and going from the house. There was no evidence of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle, no evidence of sexual assault, and the children remained unharmed, physically unharmed. I'm sure,
mental damage for life.
Absolutely. So there was just an absence of evidence and clues and what the police could get to. Several theories began to emerge during this slightly frenzied investigation because it was such a shocking story. It was so close to Christmas that it was all over the news. There was a lot of pressure on the police force to get this solved, basically. Could it have been someone, this was one theory, could it have been someone pretending to be a doctor to gain entry into the house on the pretense of performing a neonatal check on the newborn baby or a maternity check on the mother. News actually surfaced just a few, like I think it was within a few days of this murder, news surfaced of a story from a really close by area of another young mother who was sexually assaulted by someone who gained entry into her house pretending to be a doctor. But she escaped with her life. She wasn't murdered. And it was eventually concluded that that had nothing to do with this. But at the time, it was a lead and they had, they didn't really have to go on. So it wasn't that guy pretending to be a doctor. They didn't really have any other leads, but then came this other theory. A figure kept cropping up they did really, really wide searches and took statements from literally anybody who was nearby. The reports
up to 50,000 possibly. Like I'm struggling to figure out how this many people got asked questions.
That's right. So the good-looking man in the leather jacket, that's who we were looking for now. That's who the police sketch was of, which was on the newspaper and it was on the news. So he was seen several times that day by many different people. And he was seen running really fast in the direction away from the house. But not that he was coming from the house, but he was going away from where the house was located. Yeah. And what's really strange is that one woman recalled seeing him vomiting quite violently. But while he was vomiting, he had his hands firmly stuffed in his pockets. So he was on the street, he stops running, he vomits, but he keeps his hands in his pockets. And this stuck out to her as being really fucking weird. Other people had seen him violently throw up, but this is the only report of the hands in the pocket situation, which
interesting.
I mean, does feel a bit weird, doesn't it?
It's such a strange detail that it either feels made up or really important,
Yeah. So it was early January by the time that the image of this man, the first of its kind, was on the front of the newspaper. Loads of people came forward with names of who they thought this person could be, and they were all systematically ruled out and discounted because they had alibis, or it was just, it was nothing to do with them. They don't own a leather jacket, whatever. That brings us to the next suspect. The next possible theory was the muttering Irish woman. Now, you may be sensing a theme. If you've listened to episode 2. So this lady was described as a young blonde woman acting suspiciously on a bus that she boarded close to the crime scene.
Was she strongly built and had big teeth as well?
Nothing was said about the state of her teeth, to be fair, so we don't exactly know. But she was heard muttering incoherently, but quite loudly. She was described as repeating the same phrases. She was seen by loads of different people on this bus. She kept saying that she'd done something terrible over and over again. She was babbling about going to Lime Street Station, which is the main railway station in Liverpool, and she wanted to take a train to London. So it can't have been that incoherent if someone heard her whole getaway plan, right? But they said that she was talking about getting on a plane from London, and she kept saying, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God," over and over again. So this woman was never traced, and she never came forward. So, I mean, who knows what that was about? Could our culprit have in fact been part of a cult who performed a ritualistic sacrifice? This is the next and most prominent theory in this case. It is so bizarre. This whole line of inquiry is so bizarre. So there's a man called Chief Inspector Bert Balmer. And Bert Balmer. And he certainly thought that this was the key to this whole investigation. He was going to blow the case wide open. He wasn't really attached to the case himself, but he was a senior chief inspector, so he's a senior police officer. But he was really notorious in the area because not too long before this case, he had bungled the case of the Cameo murders, which may be a story you hear in due course. So we're in the same area, and this was the robbery and killing of some people who worked at the Cameo Picture House Cinema. And the case was just handled really badly, and he was the man in charge of this case. It was handled really badly. A man called George Kelly was hanged for this crime, but he and his accomplice were later cleared of all charges. Too late. And they literally had no connection to each other at all. But for some reason, he was hell-bent on joining these two together and saying that they were accomplices and they carried out these murders as a team. And it was completely just, his whole argument was completely trashed. Sadly, obviously too late for George Kelly. So he had a bit of a bad reputation in the area, and a lot of people didn't want to give statements or talk to him, especially a lot of young men, because they were so terrified that he was going to pin something on them and be wrongly accused of this murder. So the idea of the Polynesian tiki death cult came entirely from this inspector. Right.
I wonder how many times cults are blamed for some kind of killing where there's not a cult in miles. You know what I'm saying? Like how often that's one of the solutions.
So we're in Liverpool, right? You know, home of the Beatles, Jerry and the Pacemakers, Ferry Cross the Mersey, the Liverbirds. And we're talking about a Polynesian death cult. I mean, I have no idea how this fits together. But there was
we all know about the great Polynesian migration into Liverpool.
I mean, you know, the docks and the slave trade out of Liverpool. I mean, I can see a connection with transporting some brown people, but I've never heard about a particular connection. Doesn't mean it's not there. Far be it from me. Do your own research, people. It might be there. There was a male nurse, right, who, again, was thought to have pretended to be a doctor to gain entry into the house of our family. It was another theory because he would have had access to medicines, and they talked to this guy, they brought him in. He was said to have a mysterious tattoo, which was supposedly a reverse image of a known anti-Jewish symbol from World War II. Should I say it like that? Because we don't like to say the words.
Yeah, because I think you're not supposed to on YouTube for some reason.
Yeah, so we get flagged. So everybody knows what I mean.
So would that be the Native American symbol then that is that reverse?
I'm not sure if I suspect it's some sort of other translation of the shape, because they're talking about it as being really tied to this Polynesian tiki death cult, and that apparently this is a known thing. And in the 60s, I'm not sure that Liverpool was a hotbed of, you know, underground death cult activity. But so but it may not be that that's what this tattoo was of at all. But he had this mysterious tattoo. It could have just been a tattoo, which marked him out as a wrong-un in the 60s, right? Sailors, criminals, you know, these are your people that have tattoos, right? You and me.
Yeah. Actually, my doctor here in Mexico has a big tattoo, and I was like, yes.
So I mean, talk to Queen Victoria about her tattoos, man. I mean, the whole royal family. So that's for another day.
Oh, let's do that.
So this guy was completely ruled out of this poor male nurse was ruled out of any wrongdoing in this case. And like whether or not he was in a tiki death cult, I don't know, but he didn't do this murder. Some local writers and historians have since discussed this case and have posited that it was either entirely fabricated by Balmer because he was so desperate to solve another crime that he just completely made this up. But one retired policeman did say, and there's only one mind, that he found a tiki altar in the victim's house. And so maybe they were part of the cult, and maybe her murder was a ritualistic murder as part of the cult activity. And so not that it was like her own fault, but I guess if she was part of the thing, they were sort of trying to say that. And they even had pathologists look into the positions of all the stab wounds to see if they could make a pattern out of them. I mean, they couldn't, but it was worth a shot, maybe. It's also been said by a local writer that Balmer himself was probably a psychopath. This is a guy who'd worked with criminal psychologists and done a lot of work in this area. I'll put all the details up in the notes afterwards. And it was suggested that Balmer himself was a legit psychopath. And so his handling of this case and his coercion, he like would coerce people into giving false statements. And he was just a bad guy all around, basically.
Yeah.
So despite several reappeals over the years and nearly 50,000 statements made, the murder of Maureen has never been solved. It is highly likely that her killer is long dead.
Yeah.
And very little is known about the lives of her family who she left behind. But I'm sure that her little boys are traumatized. Not little anymore, but I'm sure they've led a really difficult life.
Right, because they'd be about my parents' age, which would put them in like early to mid 60s.
Yeah. So, I mean, whether they're still around, I don't know. But that obviously they want to keep quite private. Like I say, over the years, there have been several kind of appeals for new information. There was one guy who was trying to write a book. So he was gathering a lot of information about this particular case. But ultimately, there's a dead end everywhere you look in this case because there just isn't any more evidence to go on.
It seems wild. One, that it would have to have happened in broad daylight since the time difference is sometime between lunch and sometime between 6 when the husband comes home.
Yeah.
The husband's not a suspect for it whatsoever?
Well, I don't see. This is the thing. I don't know. I mean, if he were part of the cult, you know, maybe. It doesn't ever come up that there's a suggestion of that. But I mean, obviously, it's where you're going to go first, surely.
How does somebody leave the house? If you're stabbing someone 14 times, you're getting blowback for sure.
Yeah.
So you can't just walk outside without leaving a trail so they would know which direction of the house you left or something.
So obviously, you know, it is back in the day, maybe crime scene science isn't as great. Maybe if it was him and he lived in the house, he was able to clean himself up and remove the traces. But it was incredibly foggy that day and like a terrible freezing mist. And in December, it would have got dark anywhere from 3 o'clock onwards, maybe even a little bit. It might have been dark. You know, if the fog had really descended, then, you know, outside wouldn't have been broad daylight, you know.
Yeah. So I could see how you would become fascinated with this and go like crazy down a rabbit hole trying to solve it. Like if you were an author or something like that, or
exactly
similar to like how this whole true crime podcast thing popped off with Serial. You know, it's just like she even says, this is just the crime that fell into my lap. And so, and now, you know, here we are all these years later and Adnan is somewhat free, I guess. He's still dealing with some stuff, but I can see getting lost in this one because it's unsatisfactory that it's not solved. And it seems so not easy to have committed because you're not talking about like one shot or something like that. You're talking about 14 stab wounds. Yeah.
And they always say that stabbing is close contact. It's more likely to be a crime of passion because you have to be physically closer. And the physical act of doing that is a different level, isn't it? Than being at a distance with a gun or something. And with the children there.
Yeah.
So really what's been mostly suggested in a lot of the theories and stuff that the police have said is that they think the lunch was interrupted because it remained half eaten. So the doorbell rings. They're in the middle of eating lunch. She opens the door. Someone forces their way in, or perhaps they were, you know, pretending to be a doctor or somebody she knew, somebody pretending to be somebody who seemed safe, or they forced their way in, but not so much that there was a forced entry because she opened the door. And then they think that this person, you know, coming into the house, she backed down the hallway and because they were coming into the house, and that's how she maybe took them into the living room to, you know, to say sit down, or maybe he forced. I mean, I'm saying it seems more likely, but we just don't know. And because there was no robbery, nothing else in the house had been disturbed. She wasn't assaulted.
Personal.
It does seem like it wouldn't be a random thing. But then they didn't do anything to the children, and they left the children there. So
I mean, even a murder has to have a code, right?
Well,
you know, no kids. I'll just traumatize them, but I won't do that. That's bizarre.
Yeah. So that is the unsatisfactory story that I have to tell you today.
Interesting.
So, yeah. Thanks for listening.
So I kept forgetting that you said it was like in the 60s at first. So I kept placing it in my head further back, and then you would reference the 60s again. I'd be like, oh shit, I have to update but yeah, that's insane that they've had that many people that they've spoken to, and it's
they've really tried.
Wild. Yeah, that's wild. And it's not so far back that it's like forensics weren't somewhat something,
exactly. Yeah.
At least by then you have thumbprints, fingerprints, whatever. I don't know if you wouldn't have DNA or anything like that, but you would at least have blood typing.
Yeah, and you would be able to, see blood. You would be looking for hair and you know anything like that, residual, evidence of that kind. Footprints. But they never found the weapon, so
somebody took it with them, whatever it was.
Yeah.
And I guess I can understand, as long as your face and hands were clean, if it's that cold, you'd have a big winter coat so you could walk away probably.
Or maybe you've got your hands stuffed in your pockets while you
Or maybe you got your hands stuck in your pocket because your face was clean, but your hands weren't. And so
if you're wearing a black leather jacket, number one, that's white clean. And number two, it's not showing up blood necessarily. Yeah. And if you've got your bloody hands in your pockets, but what you've just done, you regret.
Yeah, this kind of reminds me of the Jill Dando murder bit, because there was like a runner that people were looking at for a while.
That was definitely a tangent that everybody went off on. Yeah,
and it got it turned focus during that time and all that kind of stuff. Like really kind of interesting. And
there was just the new documentary that's come out about Jill Dando.
Right.
I don't know if you've got it out there, but
I think it's on Netflix. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So it recently came out. But I don't really think there's anything new included in that. I watched it. I don't feel like we've moved on with this case at all. I'm pretty sure though. I'm pretty sure they know what happened. I'm pretty sure they know exactly what happened, and it's just not. It feels way too. It feels way too strangely handled for them to just not have anything. That just seems really bizarre.
I've always had creepy vibes about and okay, so this happened it was like a little bit before Princess Diana died, right?
Yeah.
And there was all those because I remember like all the equation and to her and things.
Yes, so they used to say she was the nation's sweetheart,
but she probably pissed off somebody important type of thing, and it made me feel like that news producer guy.
So she was. So I don't know how much I'm going to get sued for talking about this. Disclaimer: it's just one guy's opinion. There was suggestion that she had been doing an investigation into the crimes of people who worked at media companies in the UK, who have been investigated and have been found now to have committed offences against younger humans.
Yeah, fair.
And it may be that she had this literally like the smoking gun on that really big serial offender, and was about to put that out into the world. That is the biggest suggestion.
That makes sense to me, that it because it was so cleanly done.
Yeah,
timed well. And
then there was also the whole suggestion that it could have been the Serbians, because she had done a news report about what what had been going on in the news and the war. And again, I don't want anybody to
we don't know anything
on me talking about this.
we were young adults when it happened, barely barely into our 20s, I think, or at least in my case I was barely into my 20s at the time.
And I'm only a couple behind you, so
well, we don't know shit, but I remember it. Like I remember it. I think I remember it roughly because she looked like Diana.
Yeah.
And I guess she was just kind of famous. Even to me,
was kind of ever present on our TV. She was the kind of the queen of light entertainment and news presenting, and she did the whole Crime Watch program where they tried to. I should have looked into whether there was a crossover between Crime Watch investigating this case and something to do with Ms. Dando.
Oh, yeah. Interesting.
But sorry, my research didn't take me that deep.
It's just funny because that, like, some of the things that you were saying, like, that's what popped into my head. I was like, oh, that kind of reminds me. And I haven't thought about that in ages. I do know the documentary popped up because I saw that and I was like, oh, I remember that. But there's a lot of similar. I don't know why it seems like, even though it's a completely different type of murder, but like a one and done type of thing. Like it seems like the kind of thing that's either personal or you have a serial pattern, you know, and that would happen in a lot of places.
I mean, one thing that I thought was if she's in the kitchen with the children having lunch and the lunch was half eaten, how did the baby get into the basket? I understand how a toddler can get from the kitchen to the living room, right? But how did the toddler get, you know, or maybe the baby, was in the basket the whole time they were eating. He could have been like napping in there, couldn't he?
Or she could have been carrying the baby when she goes to the door. Yes, and so once they get into the living room, she puts them down.
Yeah. Or if it was someone she knew, she might have gone and.
Yeah.
But it did make me think one possibility was maybe that if it was an opportunistic thing or someone who didn't really know her, the baby and the child might have surprised them and they might not have been expecting that. So they might not have carried out the attack they intended to and then thought, oh shit, I don't want to get caught and identified, so I better kill this lady.
But again, like you could kill someone so much quicker than 14 stabbings,
That's also true. So it doesn't quite fit. And all these ways round that I've thought about it. The other lady who had just had a baby, who had the pretend doctor come to the house and assaulted her, similar scenario. Could it have been something like that? But then there was no assault here.
Yeah.
So, you wonder. I mean, it doesn't necessarily lead me explicitly to Polynesian tiki death cult, but I'm just saying the options are open.
What a swing, man. Like, if you're already known for bungling like a major crime, you're going to go straight to tiki death cult? Like, come on, man.
It's bold. I'll give him that.
And, maybe they just had the little tiki altar because they like went on a trip to Hawaii or some shit like that.
Stranger things back,
Yeah. 60s, the traveling to Hawaii was big,
Yeah.
So interesting.
Okay. So that is that's what I've got for you today.
That's what you got. All right. That's wild. Yeah, I'll be thinking about that one. Okay.
It definitely raises a lot of questions and more questions than answers, obviously.
For sure. It's weird how obsessed you can get with something. Like even ones that are solved, you kind of get a little obsessed. But when it's unsolved, you're just like, what happened? Like you really can go down that rabbit hole. All right, so I'm about to tell a grim tale for Christmas, whilst wearing a grumpy Care Bear onesie. I understand this, but let's see how this one goes. Tea's ready. Shall I be mother? Okay. How do I begin this? It's like I'm so distracted by the fact that I'm wearing a fucking Care Bear costume right now. All right. I am going to tell you the tale of the Ashland Tragedy. It's literally not the one I was planning on telling today, but while I was looking up something about the one I was trying to tell today, I discovered this and rabbit holed until it became the story that I'm going to tell today. Yes. This murders happened in Ashland, Kentucky in the United States in 1881. Ashland, Kentucky, where it's located is sort of in a tri-state area of what we would say, because it's in the sort of the northern eastern part of Kentucky, so it borders not too far away from West Virginia and above it Ohio. And so there's like people in this crime that are like, they're in Ohio or they're in West Virginia. You're like, why are they all over these places? But it's because they're relatively they're within a days or two horse travel of these locations.
Horse travel, a clue.
No. just the directions. So 1881, Ashland, Kentucky. Ashland was a small community that was starting to be somewhat on the rise because they were discovering, it was a farming community, a population about 3,000, a little over 3,000 people. And they were discovering a lot of what they call pig iron in the ground or iron ore in the ground. I think it's called pig iron because pigs would discover it. Possibly. Okay. I don't really know why. I feel like there was a reason why it was called pig iron at the time. So because of this, a like factory and industry started to pop up in the town roughly. And so people wanted to kind of be in the area. And so you would work in the iron factory, and then you would also have your farm that you would have to work as well. Our victims in this case are the 17 and 14-year-old children of the Gibbons family. The parents are Martha and John. They have an estranged marriage in which John would just fuck off for periods of time, and he just happens to not be in the picture at the time of this crime. Martha, the matriarch of the family, she wanted to visit her eldest married daughter who was in Ohio. So she took her youngest child, Henry, who was about 11 at the time, and went to go visit the eldest daughter, whose name I couldn't find for whatever reason, but in Ohio, which was, probably a day's travel or so, leaving Robert and Fanny behind. Robert was 17. Again, Fanny was 14. Robert had lost his leg in a childhood accident at a rail car where I think he was probably being dared by boys to do something or whatever.
Okay.
And in the process, he lost his leg. So he had been an amputee into his young adulthood. He was 17 years old. And he was working in the iron factory at the time of this crime. They also had a guest that night, a neighboring family. Oh, and I just realized I didn't write down the mother's name, but I'll call her Mrs. Thomas. Mrs. Thomas and Mrs. Gibbons were friendly, and so she offered up her 14-year-old daughter, which reports, like all the stories I read, made her 18 or 19. But when you look at her gravesite, she's 14 also. And it would make more sense if she's friends with Fanny that they would be
the same age.
So this is Emma. Her last name is Carrico or Thomas, but Thomas is her stepfather's name.
Right.
So Mrs. Thomas says to Mrs. Gibbons, yeah, Emma can come over and spend the night. And they're roughly close farming houses enough that as the kids were hanging out that night and giggling and stuff like that, the neighbors could hear, including Mrs. Thomas, could hear them having a fun little Christmas Eve night. This was
Christmas slumber party.
Yeah, this was actually December 23rd and 24th. That was going to be, the big Christmas Eve thing or whatever. So Robert gets home around 8:30 after he's left the iron factory for the night, and the kids are just having a lovely little time, giggling until the wee hours and all that kind of stuff. At around 4 o'clock in the morning, Mrs. Thomas wakes up to stoke the fire, and she looks out towards the house that the kids were, and she notices a light that she thought was kind of odd because it would be too early for them to wake up. So she thought maybe they left a lamp burning or something like that. And so for just a little bit of caution, she decides to do a closer check. And as she gets closer to the house, she realizes the fucking farmhouse is on fire.
Oh my God, right.
In a panic, because her child is there, she runs and she starts screaming at the door. She tries to open the door. She can't get in. It's too hot. The flames are wicking around. She goes to windows. She's banging. She's yelling, Emma, Emma, Fanny, Robert, come out, and stuff. The neighbors nearby can hear the commotion, so they start coming out. They realize there's a fire, and they start a bucket brigade. And so, which I love that everybody just like, fire, and everybody grabs a bucket and starts running. But they set up a bucket brigade, and they're starting to pull out some of the fire. And Emma or Mrs. Thomas is going nuts. And so one of the male neighbors, whose name I forget at this point, Faulkner or something like that, is like, woman, calm down. What the hell? And she's like, my dog, Emma's there. The kids are there. And so he's like, right. So he starts going to the windows and breaking the windows and looking in and yelling for the children. He sees Emma's body on the ground, and he calls to another male neighbor to kind of help. And he gets boosted into the window. He grabs her. He's, fighting water, flames, stuff like that. He grabs her, pulls her out, and they put her on the yard. It's clearly that she has passed. So then he starts running around to the other windows. He ends up seeing Fanny. And then once he's inside again, he kind of stumbles upon Robert closer to the door. They'd had to really fight the flames to get that. So they pull all the children out. They realize that they're all dead. Mrs. Thomas is going bizarre, just like nuts and stuff like that for her children and her child and her children's friend. And upon closer inspection, because they were fairly badly burned, they were all in their night clothes too. So it would have been, skin versus, gowns or anything. They noticed that all the children have broken skulls. And if if it was just a fire, which could have been a light left, for going too long or something like that, why was that? So as they got closer inspection, they noticed Fanny appeared to have been choked, and Emma had been badly beaten. All the kids had been badly beaten. Upon even further inspection, it was clear that the girls' liberties had been taken with the two girls as well. So by the time Mrs. Gibbons comes back, I mean, what a horror. She's just gone to spend like an early Christmas with her eldest daughter. And she comes home to find out not only is her house burned down, but her children, her two other children have died. And that family had already suffered pain before because there's the estrangement between Martha and John Gibbons. They had lost another child, Henry, I think around the same time as the rail car accident for Robert, possibly the same incident. It was hard to piece that together. So they had suffered some loss already, and now two of their children and their farmhouse is gone. At the time, there was all these ideas of who it could have been, and one of the major theories was that John had snuck in, killed the children, and left as a revenge tactic to Martha or something like that because they don't get along. But a lot of people struggled with that because they thought that even if it was John, he would have had to do that to his child, and people couldn't get past that.
That's a fair point. Yeah.
Maybe the murder they could kind of grant, but the SA, no, not so much. But they could reason it for the neighbor kid because that's not your child, right? When Mrs. Gibbons comes back, because of John's estrangement, she just starts talking all kind of shit about John, which does keep him in the suspect list for a while. She says that he would get really dark on occasion. He would threaten that he would burn down their house, or he would threaten that he would throttle them or beat them up if they didn't do something or whatever.
Those are all the things that happened to them.
Which is things that happened to them. But upon further inspection, they had discovered that John had very solid alibi in West Virginia at the time. Someone had to go to West Virginia to find him anyway, to bring him back. And he was heavily grieving his children as well. So there's a mixed bag of people who were like, maybe he had someone with them or something. But once his alibi was cleared, he was just a grieving father. And she was both a resentful wife and a grieving mother or something. A couple of other random, there was a homeless black man that was accused at one point, and a couple random, of course, a couple random things like that. But eventually a man gets arrested for something unrelated. His name is George Ellis.
Got it.
So this is a sketch from 1881 of, I believe the one in the corner is left at the top is George Ellis.
Number one.
Yeah. He gets caught for something unrelated and immediately confesses and says that his two friends, Neil, I forget which one is which, Neil and Kraft. Oh, this is Kraft. This one, number 2 up at the top right, is Kraft. This one is Neil. Okay. And he says that Neil and Kraft had very much wanted to have access to Fanny. And so one of them he claimed, I'm going to have her by Christmas. And so his story is that he gets woken up in the night by Neil and Kraft, and they said, come with us. We're going to go basically get Fanny. And when they show up at the Gibbons house, they end up getting 2 for the price of 1. And he claims that that they enter the home and they attack, Kraft and Neil attack the 2 girls, and Robert gets awakened and comes down to try to run to call for help. But he gets I think hit upside the head or something, immediately, like killing him instantly, and they drag him back into the home, and they finish what they're doing with the girls, while Ellis says he was in the corner, really struggling with what he was witnessing, but too afraid to run away himself. At one point, Emma fights so hard, he claims, and she realizes she knows who they are, and she yells out, "Will, I know it's you. I'm going to tell my mother." And so he calls over Ellis to hold her down. And so he says, I had to hold her arms while they finished what they were doing with the girls. And then they end up, Fanny gets choked, and Emma gets hit over the head. I think all the children did have skull damage, though, in some way, shape, or form. And then because they didn't want to, they said that they were using an axe and a crowbar or some kind of metal thing that was found at the Gibbons farm, which I think is strange that you would have tools like that in the house. So maybe they went to an outer building first or something like that. It seems odd that it was from their own tools or whatever, because it feels like someone would know the farm well to be able to do that. But they left those weapons there, like those items were left in the house, and they were covered in blood, and so people knew that that's what had been used. And so he confesses. They round up Kraft and Neil, and they have to immediately find an alternative place to hide them because the town goes wild. And as I mentioned on the Lavinia episode, the lynch mob, this must have been as American can be, because they were immediately trying to figure out where they can hold Ellis, Kraft, and Neil, so that they could put them through the proper trial, due process, because the town was going to fuck them up. They end up moving them around or whatever, and they managed to get to trial for Ellis. Ellis finds out in the process leading up to his trial that if he confesses and basically, I guess now we would call it turn state's evidence against his accomplices. At the time, it was just, if you're going to tattle, you'll get a different sentence. So rather than trying them all three together, they tried George Ellis separate so that he would legally be able to be a witness against his the other two. So they did his trial first. He gets convicted because he says he's guilty, but he says he didn't do any of the things besides hold her down and stuff like that. They give him life in prison. And the town does not like that. They want, there's 3 children dead. And there's 3 accomplices, and they want an eye for an eye, basically. So they put him away into prison, and they end up moving Neil and Kraft onto a steamboat, a steamboat prison, essentially like a floating prison type of thing.
I did not see that coming.
Yeah, because they want to try to be able to get these guys to trial. And so this is the I forget what it's called, the Granite State Steamboat prison, essentially, which is like a floating prison. It goes up and down the Ohio River, which is another important element of where we're located. They're bordered the Ohio River, so commerce, factories, transport, and stuff like that is big down the Ohio River. So they put the 2 men on this thing because while they were trying to secure Neil and Kraft, there is a prison break, and the people do get Ellis. So I do have a grim picture. I'll show the lighter picture before I show the heavier picture. How about that?
I've been warned.
This is a long distance shot of that. See a tree in the center of that image? Yeah. Attached to that tree right now is George Ellis. And that crowd is the lynch mob that captured George Ellis and brought him to the tree. They also left him hanging on this tree for as long as possible, trying to keep the police away as this a reminder that you don't do this to children, not in our neck of the woods. So
vigilante justice, is it
big
justified?
Time? It seems so wild that this had gone on for so long in the US, and I assume kind of like to a degree kind of still sort of does. It's a smaller image, but this is when they had decided to what happens if you
cool. Okay.
So that's George. And he's still attached to that tree. And it amazes me how comfortable people are with just like chilling next to, like, first going to witness an execution of any kind. That was such a big thing.
Yeah.
in the US, but that we're so comfortable with just like,
well, I mean, and it's not just the US. I mean, all across history and all across the world, this has been such a, public execution has been a really big thing. So in my story, like I said to you, the bungled case, the guy was hanged, and that is one of the things that led to us abolishing the death penalty, because it clearly showed, hang on, we can get this wrong. But these were still public acts. I think every country's got their history with that to a degree, haven't they?
I mean, in the US, a lot of our lynching stories are especially of like Black or enslaved people, were always pretty awful because they would take souvenirs.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole different ballgame. Because that's not justice. That's not what we're talking about there, obviously.
Yeah, but like in this case, this was a vigilante justice of a confessed criminal.
Yeah.
There are still some people who don't think that the confession was accurate because Kraft and Neil, to their last breath, maintain their innocence. But okay, so we got Ellis. Ellis is out.
Okay.
Neil and Kraft, they're on the steamboat, and another lynch mob gets together, and they follow the riverboat down, and they start shooting at the riverboat from both, I believe, both the shore of the Ohio River, and I think some folks get on little boats too, and they're shooting.
Okay.
And because they already knew there was going to be so many, George had just been killed by a lynch mob, and they had been fighting off lynch mobs because there was an attempted prison break also of Kraft and Neil, but they managed to get them onto the boat and things like that. That's why they end up having a boat. Okay. They put together a police force of roughly 220 men to guard Neil and Kraft. That's how bad they wanted to get them to trial alive. And the lynch mob that ends up following the boat, depending on what I read, it was roughly 50 to 60 people, somewhere around that thing. And they're just shooting off the thing. There are some of the lynch mob that dies from return fire. And I believe there's definitely a lot of injuries, but I think there's up to 5 people possibly that may have died on the ship. Neil and Kraft were not harmed during that time. They do get to trial. They both maintain their innocence. They're both convicted, and they're sentenced to death. Okay. They get to the hanging, though, because multiple times people do try to get at them. They manage to get to their hanging. I think at one point, I forget which one it was, but at one point, one of them did kind of confess under pressure, and then on the scaffold recants and says that they were innocent of this as well. So in both cases, the two that are considered the actual killers and rapists, both of them maintain their innocence to their last breath, whereas Ellis said he was there. He said he was relieved to get caught because he couldn't live with what he had witnessed. And so I can't tell if he was just really, threatened to confess. He actually was confessing something real. He was confessing something real, but named the wrong guys. There was a couple people who did not want Neil and Kraft to go down for this. And so they actually found yet another transient Black man that they gave him some piece of jewelry from one of the girls. And they were going to try, and then they were going to arrest him, citizens arrest wise, and say like, this was a theft. He had a bracelet or something like that, one piece of jewelry of Emma. It's got to be him. So
this is where vigilante justice does fall apart. Obviously, there's no chain of evidence. There's no formal investigation here.
And so someone else was like, no. We have a solid confession. We feel strong like this. This seems weird because they also plucked the homeless guy from like a whole nother place, another state, somewhere else. And we're going to try to bring him in to do that. So ultimately the town themselves got together and was like, no. It's Neil and Kraft. We're going to get those bastards. Leave this poor, transient Black man alone. So it was like one of the few times where you get like, the white crowd was like, nah, it's not the Black man. We're going to go ahead and leave him alone. And they were bloodthirsty for Neil and Kraft. What
did Neil and Kraft say about Ellis though? Because they were maintaining their own innocence. Did they have anything to say about him?
I could find very little, and I imagine there is a book about them that is somewhat detailed because it's a mix between a small book that was written at the time by someone who was witnessing all the events, and then a modern guy read that and was intrigued by it. He wanted to investigate and write his own thing. And so there is a book called The Ashland Tragedies that he has, where he includes about 30% of his book is the words of that small booklet. And then he just elaborates off of things that he has researched since then. So I imagine in something like that, there might be more details, but anything that I saw, all I see is that Neil and Kraft maintain their innocence or deny their guilt at very little. But but I don't see anything that says no.
Because it's not like they're saying we're innocent and so is he, or we're innocent but he's not, or
Yeah, I don't see anything about that. And that could also be because if they're accepted to be the baddies, that people weren't caring to listen.
Yeah.
And again, like it was unsatisfactory to the town people that George was going to get life in prison because even if because even if he didn't harm them, he was present for the harming and he didn't stop them and stuff like that. So they were like, 3 children dead, three adults are going.
So they didn't think that a life sentence was good enough. They wanted him dead.
Yes.
And so they weren't happy with the sentencing. So did they presume that a death sentence wasn't going to be handed down to the other 2, which is why they wanted to go and get them and do it themselves?
I think it's just a general thing that happened to a lot of the historical South and thing, or like this isn't quite the South, but that idea of like in some way, shape, or form, the courts are going to let us down, or
so we take care of business. Okay,
why wait? We got him. Let's just go ahead and take care of him. I think that tends to be the idea of how a town can rally so strongly behind, collective murder of who they have agreed are the things, are the assailants or whatever. But I think like once that fire is lit,
absolutely. Once the torches are lit,
and they're like, we got one of them, let's get the other. It's like a satisfactory thing of like we came together on the Gibbons' behalf essentially, and we righted the wrong, because I think there's always a certain mistrust of the police unless like you are my enemy and then I need the police, then I'm going to be behind the police. But other than that, there's always sort of a general, the police can't handle it. The police can't do what we can do collectively. And, they wanted the rapid justice. So that's what they did.
Okay.
The story is fairly well known in that particular area. And so there are grave sites for all of the kids at the main Ashland cemetery. And it's kind of wild. I'll show 2 different versions of this because it's still so known. As their grave sites aged out and got harder to read, people got together to replace the stones. So these smaller ones in front are the original. So it's written over the top. Are the original gravestones of Robert and Fanny Gibbon. And then someone eventually put these ones behind it to, update the marker.
Yeah, gosh.
And there's also this one here, which will show you what they did to the back of the new ones.
If you're listening to this on Spotify, we'll put all the images up on the Buy Me a Coffee, and you can go and check them all out there. There is a free access gallery on there.
Yeah.
If you feel like buying us the coffee,
if you feel like it. In one of full disclosure, one of the pictures is of a hanged man. So
well, we might not put that one front and center. So trigger warning.
Yeah, it's at least Googleable if we don't end up putting it up. But then on the back of the newly made headstones, they put victims of the Ashland Tragedy. And then across the way, so there's like a street kind of inside the cemetery between them is the the grave. So it's in eye shot essentially, but across there's a road that's kind of separating them. The sad thing about this is that she's by herself. She's not even buried near family. There's almost no grave sites around her, like immediately around her. But this would be the original one for Emma. Yeah. And it does say Kariko, which is her original last name. There are some reports as you're reading, sometimes she's mentioned as Emma Thomas, and sometimes she's Kariko, but Thomas was her stepfather's name.
And she didn't have the writing along the top. That was more like a regular looking gravestone with her name on the front. Yeah, that
one looks a little bit more like
what we kind of would be.
And then this is her replacement thing as well. So again, I did that math because I was like, wait a second, that math didn't sound right given everything I read. And so her own grave site does say she's 14 years old.
Yeah. And she's all on her own. Oh,
she's not around anything, which or anybody else. There are other grave sites nearby, nearish, but like there's multiple what could be plots. That you would have family or whatever. Yeah. So they're within eyeshot of each other, but they're not joined together. But they're they're obviously always going to be joined together in this tale. And I couldn't find anything specific about like what happened to the gibbon, the remaining gibbons after. Did they stay in the area or not? I didn't see anything about that. I'm sure that information is in that main book. But that's the tale of the Ashland Tragedy, December 23rd, 1881. They were all getting ready for Christmas. They were just having a jolly little pre-Christmas hang. I know this can be so dark sometimes.
It's really awful because you can't just segue into anyway.
And now we'll talk about something else.
But I mean that is what we're here to do. I mean, in a way, I know these cases are in no way sort of similar, but because mine is unsolved and yours is solved. Like
it's a question because there's some people who did not believe it.
And
so
I would say doesn't have that like neat, all tied up with a bow type of feeling to it at all.
Yeah, because and you wonder. I mean, I can only imagine how many wrongful convictions and wrongful accusations in the past when there really wasn't ways to easily prove or eliminate suspects and stuff like that in the past, and how many stories, especially like. Me being a mixed Black American, like how many stories of Black enslaved or during Reconstruction, during Jim Crow, Black boys and men that were accused of crimes that they couldn't have possibly committed. Or that they would even know 100% which white man was the man who did the crime, but it would be these Black boys or these Black men that would get lynched for it. Like that's a huge part of American history, and I'm sure I'm going to end up telling some of those stories at some point. And there's no positive to something like that, right? Like they're just horrific stories. But again, I mean, I think one of the goals that you and I had when we wanted to start doing this is talking about those parts of the things in a cultural context and in also just an experience context of being from those communities at times. There's a lot of things that we see where white people get away with stuff and brown people don't, or brown people are accused and convicted when they couldn't possibly have been the thing. And like this case itself could have gone the wrong way because there was multiple people who were accused. That were eventually eliminated, and it was only because George Ellis confessed that they zeroed in on George, Kraft, and Neal, right? Like they didn't go any further after that, and who knows what would have been the kind of investigation you would have done in 1881 if someone confesses. You're just like, that's open and shut case, Johnson. And you just move on with your life. So I don't, I'm not really sure why. It feels undone, like incomplete at least. Because the other thing is, I was looking to try to see were there anything similar because there was nothing stolen. Again, like yours, right? It was just the assault. I think maybe it was the case that the assault was the intended thing, and that maybe they didn't expect so many people to be there.
Well, they got a piece of jewelry to try and give to. I mean, maybe the jewelry wasn't from one of the girls that they tried to, when they were trying to palm it off.
So that's the other part. Was it even one of her one of her things, or was it stolen later? And
or otherwise, how did you have that then?
Like, did you steal it so that you could give it to some poor transient? So things like that, I think are there. I think there's definitely interesting parts of this tale. And I was starting to listen to an interview of the author of that book, The Ashland Tragedy. I think his name is Joseph. Anyways, I'll write it. I'll link it in the thing. I don't remember his name. But I didn't get to the point where we talked about what his theories were, or they were going to talk about what his theories were. So I didn't get that far in because I literally started researching this last night. I just went down the rabbit hole and it completely changed the direction of what I was going to share. Because with this one, I think it tickles areas that I have that are part of my interest in true crime, wrongful conviction. And things like that is something that I've done like activism for Bell Project and things like that, Innocence Project. I have donated money and things like that, because those are things that I think impact one of my communities a lot.
Absolutely.
In the United States. And so in case like this, where it's hard to say, it could have very well been two homeless Black men that could have been, for this.
And it's not just being wrongly accused, but it's even if you did do a crime, your sentencing isn't going to be the same, is it? You're going to be judged more harshly. You're going to be given a harsher sentence. So no part of the judicial process is fair to those people.
And with that, I also feel like it was so crazy that they went for these three white men with the same vigor that I feel like would have probably been used against, if the Black men had been the ones accused of it.
That must be because it's young girls, right? Must be
young girls. They're 14-year-old girls.
Yeah, exactly.
And by all accounts of the description of the girls and of Robert as well, is that they were, Robert stepped up when his father failed the family, one-legged, he started working in the factory to take care of his family. With the girls, they were both described in ways that I find kind of, gross ways of describing, innocent, pure, those kinds of words that I don't really particularly love descriptions of, but they were, well put together, clean. Taste. Chaste, things like that. Like those are the descriptions. Pleasant dispositions. So the girls,
because of course, if they were even a little bit, prissy, then maybe they deserved it. We've been
if they called them frigid and everything like that. It might have been a different thing. But again, these are 14-year-old girls in context that for us are still very much children, and maybe for them they were getting closer and closer to the marriage, cycle or something. But I think the idea of these children just having I think the pre-holiday thing about it. It was such a fun thing because they were going to be without an adult, like even though their one mother was across the road or whatever, it was a grown-up night for these children. And that's why they were giggling into the wee hours. And all the neighbors had reported hearing them and giggling and stuff, which is so wild that they weren't heard during the crime.
So I think that, that's really interesting. But also I want to just give props to the mother who heard, is that Mrs. Thomas? Because when you were telling the story and you said, she heard something and I thought, and she just turned over and went back to sleep, But no, she went out and she went to investigate and she looked. And then quite often in these stories, you get to the point where some adult thinks, I'm sure it's nothing, and then happens the crime and you don't find out about it until later. But so when you said, she actually went to look, I thought, maybe, that really filled me with that tiny little glimmer of hope,
right?
That she might have been able to stop something or intervene. Because actually she showed up, she did the right thing.
Her panic after the fact, there's even one thing I read where people were trying to tell her like it's too late to continue to be this hysterical, like, and let a mother grieve the way a mother's going to grieve. Like she all that energy and all that stuff that goes into being a parent, and you're seeing your child there dead, and not only dead but horrific, like whatever they went through before they died, horrific. And I imagine the guilt she would have felt for allowing her child to be there, all those things that are very natural
Yeah,
as,
totally.
human reactions. She really suffered from what I was able to read about her, at least in that moment. She really suffered the loss of her child. And so I think maybe that too, like all the neighbors that witnessed her grief, the children, what they look like after the fact and everything like that, that kind of stuff. I can imagine the rage. Like I could imagine feeling that kind of rage, even if the children are not related to me, but just the knowledge. I mean, shit, I'm feeling that kind of rage right now about what we're witnessing on the other side of the planet, right? Like you can't, there's I'm always surprised.
It's a different ball game. Gloves are off. It's totally, it's a different scenario entirely when you bring children into it. Yeah.
Yeah. And even for people like me who don't want to be a mother, or doesn't want to be a parent.
Still a fucking human though,
you're
right?
still a fucking human. And you're like, you see that kind of suffering and you're like, there under no circumstances is it okay that happened to those children. And I could imagine the rage. And if I lived in a small town too, and I knew every kid there, like all those kinds of things, I think.
Absolutely. Gosh.
So like, I don't not get it. I don't not get the vigilante justice thing.
Yeah.
I think it's obviously there's ways in which it's very irresponsible and, you could be just fucking wrong and kill the wrong people. Like there's so many things that are bad about it, but I don't not get the inclination that people have in the moment. Sure. You want to solve the problem. You want to eliminate it from happening again. And in your rage, you could be making really poor decisions, which could have happened in this case, or they could have gotten it right. I do not know, like it's not 100% clear to me, but that is the tale of the Ashland tragedy. And even, 100 and what's that math? 160, I think, or so years later, it's still pretty heavy, that people remember.
Yeah, and that's very telling in the small areas, when stories like this, they take on a sort of a mythical personality, don't they? And they'll just be retold forever, I would imagine. Yeah. And again, that's the little crossover between the two stories because, my case has been reopened, several times over the years in the hopes of still solving it, because for the people who live in that community and remember that, like we were saying, when you've lived through a crime and you remember hearing about it on the news or whatever, you do take on something of that. So it remains shocking. Well, thank you for telling us.
Merry Christmas, Happy Christmas, everybody. So
obviously it's weird because we're not even in December yet at the time of recording. So we are approaching the festive season, but we're not entirely there. But we've got good at figuring out what's airing when and knowing when to record season.
And we're both from entertainment, so like I'm from behind the camera. I'm used to recording Christmas episodes in July and stuff.
I was going to say, to be honest, I think we've left it a bit late.
Like we're really pushing the envelope a month away.
So it's not too weird for us, to be getting Christmassy ahead of time. But I think that brings us to a close, perhaps.
Yes. You said there was a festive surprise.
There is a festive surprise.
Do I need to put my helmet back on?
Actually, that would be good. Yeah. Okay. Right. Hold on. I'm just going to get my screen ready.
Oh, it got hot, so I opened my...
Yeah, I mean, there is something to be said for wearing a thick, winter onesie in
Mexico.
Mexican weather. At least it's getting cold where I am, so... the weather is turning. Okay, so I love it so much. I love also how you can just be like, just pull it down when you just don't want to talk to anyone.
Yeah.
So we last week when we were together doing some recording and we were chatting and we were discussing what we were going to do this week and what the plan was. And you said about your Christmas onesie, and we decided we knew this was going to be our festive episode. You said you were going to wear your Christmas onesie, and I made a joke that I would rewrite "'Twas the Night Before Christmas."
Yes.
So obviously, as soon as we got off that call, what did I go and do?
You got to work. Nice.
It's a very clear thing to do that. So. Settle down next to the fire, dear listener, and join us as we get festive. 'Twas the podcast before Christmas, and the victims were toast. Not a listener could solve it, not even a co-host. The headphones the headphones were hung by the mic with care in anticipation for the show that would soon be off air temporarily. The true crime fans will be sleeping snug in their beds while theories of murders dance in their heads. And Sharmane in her onesie and Rhia in her mittens. By the true crime bug, they had truly been bitten. And all across the internet, there arose lots of chatter that the latest victim was covered in blood spatter. They switched on the torch and it lit with a flash to discover the body next to a case full of cash. This story would surely make it onto the show, given the trail of disappearing footprints that lay in the snow. When what should Scotland Yard investigators discover? But the evil elf who did it had run for cover, or AKA, he'd legged it.
He legged it.
So the blended besties presented the case with glee, hoping there would be a subscriber, or 103. Enjoy your festive break. We'll be back in the new year for cases galore to fill your ears with cheer.
I fucking love it.
It's so cheesy.
I love it. Thank you for doing that. That's awesome. And yeah, we are going to
everybody happy holidays.
Yeah, happy holidays. We are going to take a wee bit of a break, just a couple weeks for us. Or just a couple weeks for airtime.
Yes.
We will be back.
Because we know that you do actually, as much as you love a gruesome murder, you don't want it with a side of Christmas merriment or whatever holiday that you're celebrating over this Festivus season.
Mm-hmm.
So, we will be taking a break from recording. Things will still be airing.
Mm-hmm.
But then there'll be a couple of weeks off in the actual airing.
So this kind of is sort of a chapter close for the first part of our show. We've done, this will be, I think, episode 7 by the time or 6, 7?
Yeah.
7. 6?
I think it's
6. Oh, it's right there at the top. Read your own notes, Sharmane. It's episode 6. So we did our first 6 episodes. Usually that's my marker for a TV show. If you don't hook me in your first 6 episodes, that's my marker. So I hope in these first 6 episodes we have secured your attention.
And if we haven't, maybe give us another go in the new year. You might feel differently.
we're still getting our legs under us. In it, because the other part is just like the way I've talked about true crime in the past versus the way I'm talking about it now is so different that it's like it's also altering kind of the way that I'm moving on this show as well. So it's kind of an interesting time, I think, to be doing this. But I do love the cultural context conversations that we're having. It's a different perspective than I think other people get. And given some of the things that I've recently started research for future episodes, I'm only starting with the ones I've never heard of before. And so I'm digging from different cultures. Japan's going to feature again soon because I have like 2 or 3 of them that keep popping up in my head. I'll finally get into Mexico, where I'm currently living, soon as well.
Yeah.
And, I'm sure you've already talked about Wales and a couple other spots. So yeah, stick with us. Follow us on the social medias at Matcha Masala Murder on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube at Matcha Masala Murder. Also listen to us on the Spotify if you can. Follow, rate, review on whichever podcatcher you are listening to us on, because that helps get other people to pay attention to us.
Click all the good buttons, please.
Click all the buttons. Repost, regram, reshare, whatever. And also tell your friends, because everybody has at least 4 true crime besties.
Oh, I like that statistic.
That's just from my ass, but I believe
it. Sounded really plausible. I thought it was a thing. I'm accepting that as fact from now on.
Yeah.
So, and even if your only true crime besties are us, that's 2 already. So I'm sure you can find 2 other people. There's
2 of us. Literally, I pulled that number out because right off the top of my head, I could name 4 people.
Amazing.
That's how it happened.
So do tell your friends, because that is the only way we're going to grow. We need word of mouth to get us to where we want to be, to provide you with all the things we want to provide you with, and to really widen our horizons and keep bringing you what it is that you want to hear. And you can always email us. Did you know that? I don't know if you knew that. You could email us and you could tell us your suggestions, comments, queries, or anything you want us to know, or something you want us to talk about. And
I have an idea about that.
Or we may not. I don't know.
Sure. But I have an idea about that.
Oh.
If you want to email us, but there's one of us you would prefer to tell the story that you suggest, if we end up wanting to do it, in the subject, write Rhia or Sharmane. Nice. And then we will promise that even though we share the email account, that we'll only read the one that says our name. If it's general, whoever gets there first is whatever. But if you say...
Put it in the subject line. Nice.
Yeah, put it in the subject line. Then we'll make sure that way, because we're still trying to surprise each other. So far, to the best of my knowledge, neither of us have known about...
Absolutely. We've done so well. It's worked really out brilliantly. Yeah. I'm so happy about that. That's one of my favorite bits of this show.
Yeah.
You can also leave us a voice note on the Spotify's.
That's true.
No? Yeah, you can. Yeah. So you can always do that.
And if you're surprised about what our email address is, it's literally matchamasalamurder@gmail.com. It was really hard.
You know where to find us. You know what to do. We'll be back in the new year. Catch you on the flippity flip.
Catch you on the flippity flop. Happy Festivus. Happy
Winter.
Happy winter, whatever the thing is that you celebrate at this time of year. Or
even
don't.
If you just celebrate everyone leaving me alone, there's festive chocolate and cookies to eat, then I wholeheartedly support that endeavor.
100%. Yes. Peace out, y'all.
Bye for now.
Matcha and Masala is produced and hosted by Sharmane Fury and Rhia Kaur.
This is a ManeHustle Media production in association with Virtual Rhiality Studios. All stories are researched to the best of our ability with information freely available to the public.
This podcast is intended for entertainment purposes, and due to the nature of true life crimes, some information remains inaccessible and new information can come to light after recording.